Hi everyone. I hope I'm audible and visible to all of you. Could you just give me a quick yes in the comments if you can see and hear me? Awesome. So great. Welcome to today's session on tokenization of real world assets. So obviously this is a very vast field. And as you know, I'm also going to be doing a very detailed masterclass on this later. Today, I want to introduce the concept to you. What exactly do we mean by the term tokenization of real world assets on the blockchain? So now if you have a look at this diagram in front of you, it outlines the 5 steps or aspects of tokenization. So obviously it begins with what is the real world asset that we are going to tokenize. That's naturally going to be the first step. And I'll give you a list of what are the different kinds of assets that are usually tokenized. Once we've identified that asset, we go to the next step. We identify which blockchain we are going to use for this tokenization. So while there are a lot of blockchains in the world, many of them are not suitable for tokenization. Because for tokenization, we need to keep a lot of the legal and regulatory aspects in mind also. The third thing is dematerialization. So, if you've ever invested in the stock market, you know that you're going to be holding shares in the demat form. So, what exactly do we mean by this term demat or dematerialization? Then we will talk a little bit about fractionalization and what that really means. And finally, a little overview of what are the different laws that come into the picture when we talk about tokenization. So, these are the various steps that are going to be involved. And of course, as and when you have any kind of questions, please feel free to just put them there in the comments and I'll start taking them. So as of right now, whatever I've said, is it clear to all of you? Give me a quick yes if it's clear. Awesome. Perfect. So now let me start with a very interesting simple concept. We sometimes say that a blockchain is an internet of value. Now, what does that really mean? Now, when we look at the conventional internet, it is built for data. So the data could be in the form of text, it could be in the form of the video. In fact, the video you're seeing right now, you're looking at me on your screen, that's a video which is being streamed. So text, video, audio, all of these various types of data can be sent across the globe in seconds or milliseconds because of the conventional internet. And what are the protocols there? We talk about TCP/IP, UDP, we talk about SMTP, POP, all these different protocols, FTP, HTTPS, HTTP, all these conventional protocols come in to move data across the world. Now, where blockchain comes in is that it enables the movement of value across the globe again in seconds. Now, what do we mean by this value? So, we are talking about tokenized versions of real world assets, which could be fiat money, like dollars, for example. It could be equity shares, it could be real estate, it could be art, it could be carbon credits. So, when we tokenize any real world asset, put it on the blockchain, we can enable the transfer of this value, right? So that's kind of how I want you to think about it. So now, as I told you in this diagram, the first thing that we need to understand is what is the real world asset that is going to come into the picture when we talk about tokenization. So let me quickly share something on my screen. Give me a second. So here on your screen, you'll be able to see the list of 15 different asset classes, which I think are perfect for tokenization. The first one being aerospace assets. So, we talk a lot about the space race. So where satellites and other land rovers, ISS, all of this is being now looked at very carefully by almost all countries. And everybody wants to put out their own satellites into the space. So that's one asset which can be a very good project for tokenization. The second one is art. So when we talk about physical art, The Mona Lisa painting, for example, classic case for tokenization, where the museum which is holding it will continue to hold the painting, but people like you and me could buy fractions of it. And as the value of that art goes up over time, the value of our tokens also goes up. Aviation assets, where we could talk about things like drones, aeroplanes, we could talk about helicopters, or even entire airports. Carbon credits is a very, very interesting thing which I'm personally working a lot on, because when we talk about carbon credits, carbon credits are those kind of, you could say, legal documents which are given to you for saving pollution. So if you reduce pollution, for every 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide that you reduce from the atmosphere, you can get one carbon credit, and these can be traded around the world. Now, they are already happening conventionally, but there are lots of scams that take place in that. And that's where this becomes an ideal case for blockchain tokenization. We talk about collectibles. Now, we're talking about not talking about NFTs. We are talking about physical collectibles. So, whether it is postage stamps that you collect, currency notes, coins, vintage cars, all of these come under the concept of collectibles. If you guys have any questions, just keep putting them in the comments and I'll take them from time to time. Then we have copyright licenses. So, you talk about copyright license of a book, of a movie. Those can also be tokenized. And that's what we're talking about. Fiat currencies. So, today, when we look at projects like Tether or USDT, they've tokenized the US dollar. But because Tether is not a bank, it obviously does not enjoy the kind of trust that a bank would enjoy. So, if a bank tokenizes fiat currencies, that's what we're talking about. Then we can have financial investment. So you talk about alternate investment funds like AIFs, or you could talk about things like debt, equity, all of that would come in. Then we have infrastructure. Now, infrastructure could be a dam, a bridge, a highway. All of these come under that. And infrastructure generates revenue streams. So, for example, when a bridge is made, it would generate tolls for a very long time in the future, 20 years, 50 years. That particular revenue stream can also be tokenized. We talk about loyalty points and rewards. So today, one of the biggest problems when we talk about loyalty points and rewards is that they are in silos. So for example, if I own loyalty points of a particular coffee shop, I have to sell it there only or redeem it there. But what if I don't want to redeem it there and I want to redeem it to get air tickets, and that is something you have? So if we tokenize all these loyalty points, then we can very easily switch between them. Then we talk about maritime assets, so ships, boats, ports, that comes into the picture. We talk about metals, so gold, silver, platinum, palladium, copper, so many of these metals can be tokenized. Mining and mineral rights, that's another huge market again. So, around the world, governments give out mining and mineral rights, whether it's for iron ore, gold, and so many other things. Those can be tokenized. We have real estate. There we already beginning to see a lot of startups working in it, where we talk about things like residential, agricultural land, commercial office spaces. All of those can be tokenized. And finally, sports teams and franchises. So if you guys like watching cricket, for example, so you have IPL teams. So an entire IPL team could also be tokenized, or a football team could be tokenized. So those are some of the examples. Let me check out some of the questions. How to start carbon credit tokenization? So that's a very good question here, which is, now when we talk about carbon credits, right? So there are two kinds of markets that come into the picture. We talk about the compliance markets and the voluntary markets. So both of these have their own pros and cons. So the steps that need to be followed is that first, one of the people who are doing projects which are reducing pollution, that could be a dam, it could be somebody who's planting trees, it could be any of those kind of entities. They need to come onto a platform. Audit and verification needs to be done that whatever they're talking about are genuine, and then we need to tokenize that on a particular blockchain, and then make it available through exchanges as well as through marketplaces, so anybody who wants to buy, sell, trade, or hold them. Of course, I'm going to go deeper into carbon credit tokenization in a session very soon, so I'll talk about it more in depth. Today I just gave you a brief overview. Another interesting question is, a business, say manufacturing unit, wants to tokenize, how to do it? Very good point. So I'll give you an example here that today a lot of companies raise funds through something called debentures. Debentures are debt instruments and they are secured by some kind of immovable asset. So, what happens in the first step is that asset needs to go into the ownership, or rather into a custodian's hands. The custodian will check everything, and custodians are legally licensed. They would then assure the investors that if you don't get your interest or your principal payment back, I will sell the asset and pay you back. So similarly, when we talk about a manufacturing unit, their property would need to move into the hands of a custodian, and then the whole tokenization process would begin. So again, I'm giving very brief answers today. I'll go deeper in future sessions. Let's look at another interesting question here. If somebody has tokens of these particular assets, what will determine that they have a share in the value? That's a very, very good question. So all of this would depend upon the documents that are available to you before you buy the asset. So let's take an example again in the conventional world. When a startup or a company is getting listed, they come out with a prospectus. So SEBI has given a whole very detailed list. What are the items that you need to talk about? Similarly, wherever you are going to tokenize a real world asset, you are going to put up a document for the whole world to see. And all these terms would come in that document. So when you're holding carbon credits, well, you have the complete ownership of that credit. But when we talk about things like aviation and aeroplane, you may not get ownership, but you may get only a right in the profits generated. Or I gave you an example about infrastructure. You may not get rights of ownership in the infrastructure. You may get a right of ownership in the toll collection. So all of this would be very clearly mentioned in the document that comes with it. Let me take another question. Give me a second. Right. So how to link physical assets with tokenized representation? Excellent question. That's again where this documentation is going to come in. So when a particular token is issued on the block, that is why we cannot use a conventional permissionless chain, because a lot of the important legal issues cannot be taken care. And I'll give you an example. One of the most important legal issues is going to be right to freeze an asset. You know, in the conventional world, if someone tries to do a crime, the court can order a bank to freeze an account, or they can order even the depository to freeze certain shares. But in the blockchain world, that's something that's not easy to do, which is the reason we need to pick blockchains which support freezing of assets when a court orders it to be done. So when we choose the right chain, whenever those assets are created, all these properties are also made available to you. And then the linking can also be done. And that is where, when I started the session, I talked about a term called dematerialization. Now, dematerialization is a very interesting term in the financial world. What it means is you have effectively transferred an asset into its electronic form. So in the conventional world today, when equity shares are listed on the stock exchange, a process called dematerialization happens, where the company enters into an agreement with a depository whereby they accept that whatever the depository holds in electronic version will be considered to be the equity shares of the company. And that is when that connection happens. And something very similar has to take place when we tokenize real world assets also. Of course, that's quite a complex process. So I can't just explain it like in a few minutes, but there are very detailed steps that we need to follow to dematerialize an asset, and then only we can tokenize it. Another interesting question: how the legal aspects will be handled in these different types of assets? So these legal aspects usually come in two types. One is the actual blockchain related laws, or the asset related laws that are going to come into the picture. These are the two things we are going to look at. So when we talk about real estate, there are lots and lots of local laws, like where is this real estate there, which country, which city, which state, and what are the laws we need to follow. And then comes the blockchain laws, which are kind of global in nature. So we are going to look at things like AML, anti-money laundering; CFT, countering the financing of terrorism; KYC, know your customer; data privacy, freezing of assets. So all of these come under the blockchain aspect. And then there are those which come in specifically for the asset. So for real estate, for aviation, for maritime, for carbon credits, depending upon the asset, there are going to be different laws that come into the picture. An interesting question. Can CBDC be tokenized? So CBDC stands for central bank digital currencies. Ideally, you would not tokenize them because they're presumed to already be tokenized. In fact, that's the whole concept of CBDC. So in the future, when CBDC becomes more common globally, it would connect through the API layer to the blockchain on which you're doing tokenization, and CBDC would be the layer in which you would pay and receive money. Because after all, if I own an asset in a tokenized form and I want to sell it to you, in that scenario, how are you going to pay me? So there are going to be two ways. One is going to be a bank operated stablecoin or a CBDC. And in fact, that's the reason CBDCs are coming into the picture, to enable payments when we talk about tokenization. So no, a CBDC wouldn't be tokenized. It is already tokenized. Another interesting question. What if the management who is governing these misuse them? So that's a very good question, and that can happen anywhere. So when we talk about things like, even in the conventional world, we see so many scams happening, which is why when we talk about tokenization, we always talk about trustees and custodians. So a government recognized trustee and custodian would actually hold the asset. So if it's real estate, they would hold all the documents so that tomorrow, if payback needs to be done, they can sell the assets and pay back the investors. So it would actually be a much safer way of doing things. Let me take another question here. If the use case is that we need to get funds to care for animals, can these animals be tokenized? Okay, that's a very, very interesting question. And I'll kind of be honest, I've not heard about this before. So I'm not really sure how this would work. But considering that when we look at someone like a dairy farm, they're buying a lot of cattle and then selling the milk and milk products. So logically, that should be tokenizable, but I'm not 100% sure. I'll actually look this up and get back to you. It's an interesting question, no doubt. How can tokenization relate to a smart contract? So when we use the word tokenization, we are saying that we are going to represent a real world asset as a token on the blockchain. Now, whenever we create tokens on the blockchain, we are going to use smart contracts to create them. So that is why a smart contract becomes a very essential part of this. Let me take another question. What are the disadvantages of tokenizing on the blockchain? Sure. So I would say one is always going to be the regulatory kind of challenges that are going to come into the picture. Like, how are we going to take care of those issues? That's one challenge that we are always going to look at. The regulatory aspect of it is another thing that we have to look at. Integration with the traditional systems. So today the banks and all are using conventional systems. How do we connect the blockchain to them? That is always going to be one particular thing. Another one is going to be, how are we going to value the asset which is being tokenized? So I would say these would be the main challenges that we need to deal with. Does this whole process of semi-decentralized as the source of product of the what will be, okay, that's an interesting question. So we're saying that, is this whole process semi-decentralized? I quite agree with you, and I'll be very honest. I think this word centralization is misunderstood. Like, you know what? Let me ask you guys a question. Can we say that Bitcoin is decentralized? What do you guys think? Is Bitcoin decentralized? Right? It's not a trick question. It's a very simple question. Can we say that Bitcoin is actually decentralized? And a lot of you people will say, yes, it is. But I'd say, no, it's not. More than 50% of the mining is done by a small group of miners. That's point number one. Second, and most important, who writes the source code or the software for Bitcoin? Because the whole of Bitcoin runs on that software. But do you even know the people doing it? Who has the right to push the Bitcoin software onto the GitHub repository from where all the nodes in the world are going to download? It's a very small number of programmers. So when we look at it from that point of view, you kind of realize even Bitcoin is not very deep. So it's a misunderstood term. Is it even possible to allow millions of people in the world to write the software? No. The software will become complete junk and the whole system will fall apart. So yes, we do need a large amount of centralization, without which is not going to work. Today, you have a Tether running USDT, and they are able to help in some ways when something goes wrong. Similarly, a small number of people maintain the Ethereum blockchain, maintain Polygon, maintain Bitcoin. So yes, we do need a lot of centralization, otherwise these systems are not going to work. Let me take another question here. Uh, how can blockchain be as aggregators? For example, assets are tokenized in supply chain management. So I'll be very honest, I have a slightly contrary view, and I do not think that supply chain is a good use case for blockchain. For maybe using things like a DLT, a distributed ledger like Hyperledger, okay, it may make a little bit of sense, but a conventional blockchain, I don't think makes sense when we talk about supply chain. For me, the most important use case is smart asset lifecycle management, that you create a smart asset on the blockchain and then the entire life cycle is managed: creation, issue, reissue, burning, transfer, escrow, all of that. And whether it's cryptocurrencies or tokenized assets, they all run on this single use case, and that I think is the only strong use case. Can we take examples, say a housing development? Can the titles of each apartment be NFTs? Very good question. Yes, it can be. So here, obviously, do not think about NFTs like Bored Ape Yacht Club, where we're talking about pictures which may not have any real world value. But yes, you can take an apartment. So let's say that there is this building in Dubai that we want to tokenize, and that entire building is worth, say, 100 crores. Now, one option is the entire building is tokenized into 100 million assets, or we could take each apartment and tokenize it, or each apartment could then have 1 million assets. So, depending upon the business models, yes, real estate is a very good use case for tokenization. It will make it available to everyone. See, everyone loves to invest in real estate, but it's not cheap. You need to spend a lot of money and a lot of headache to manage that. So if I can buy a small amount of a residential or commercial asset, I think it would be a game changer. All right. As an example, how can we tokenize my car, my home? Okay, so that's an interesting question. Well, see, people may not want to buy into your car, right? Why would they? Unless you say that, okay, I'm running a cab service and I have a X number of cars and they're generating some kind of revenue. Or you say, I have a very expensive vintage car, which is worth huge and its value is only going to go up. Now, if you want to do that, the first element you need to solve is that of trust. People need to trust you that you're not going to misuse the car after they pay you the money. And that is why I think this would be something which companies would be able to do better, or even a museum which is holding it, or a cab company, but individual not generate that level of trust, and they may not be able to do it. Of course, there are some people who may generate the trust, like say, and Amitabh Bachchan says, I've got a Rolls Royce and I'm going to put that Rolls Royce up for rent and it's going to generate revenue. And if we trust Amitabh Bachchan, maybe we'll buy into those tokens. So remember, trust is always going to be the number one issue here. Another interesting question: how tokenization relates to smart Oh, I think we've already solved some of these. Uh, Let me scroll down. Another interesting question: what are the assets that cannot be tokenized? So I would say assets which have a very short lifespan. So milk, eggs, those kind of assets which have very short lifespans, they cannot be tokenized. Very difficult to do that. Other than that, I'm not able to think of other assets. Maybe you guys could post some in the comment of what do you think are assets that cannot be tokenized. I would say only these, or assets where you cannot establish ownership. So, under international law, all of outer space belongs to all of humanity. Now, what if somebody wants to start selling you pieces of Mars? Now, Elon Musk is planning to send human beings to Mars in a few years. But can we really tokenize Mars? I don't think as of today we can. So I would say assets which have a very short lifespan, and assets which where you cannot establish ownership clearly, these are the ones that we cannot do. Another very interesting question here, let me take that up. Do the current custodian laws allow to liquidate or freeze the asset? Absolutely they do. What we've got to understand here is all that blockchain does is brings a new piece of technology, but the laws are not dependent upon a technology. Like today when you dematerialize shares, does the law say that you can use MySQL database or Oracle database? No, the law doesn't care. It talks about converting that property into electronic version. Similarly, instead of using a conventional database, we are using blockchain as a database. So yes, The current custodial laws do not need any kind of changes for that. Another very good question is that can we assume CBDCs to be redeemable for tokens specific to a particular industry? CBDCs is still very new, and in fact, I had the privilege of working for the Reserve Bank Innovation Hub last year on a white paper around CBDCs. So while CBDCs hold a lot of promise, it's a very early stage. So it's not very easy for me to answer this question. Ideally speaking, a CBDC is, today when we look at fiat currency like rupee, dollar, whatever, it exists in electronic form also in the private databases of banks. So which is why when I need to give money to you, the money needs to move from the private database of my bank to the private database of your bank. But CBDC wouldn't be like that. It would be directly controlled by the regulator, which in India's case is Reserve Bank of India, and it would run on their technology. That could be blockchain, that could be non-blockchain also. That's the fundamental difference between the two. Having said that, since they're still very new, I cannot specifically answer your question. How do you see the involvement of insurance for risk management of assets that are tokenized? I think insurance has a very important role to play here. And just as we look at conventional assets, they're insured. When an asset comes up for tokenization, I would say insurance is probably the number one issue that needs to be taken care of, so that when I invest in the tokenized version, I am confident that if something happens to the original version, somebody is going to take care of my financial interest. So yes, insurance is absolutely critical here. Uh, an interesting question: what actually tokenization means? So if I was to describe it in one sentence, tokenization is when you dematerialize a real world asset and fractionalize it and make it available in the form of blockchain tokens. That's what tokenization means. Let me see if there are any more questions. Another question is, to get decentralized experience today is to use enterprise blockchain. At least we know who is maintaining the blockchain. Yes, so we would use an enterprise or a permissioned kind of a blockchain. You would know who's running it. So you would know tomorrow if there's a problem, who do you have to go and catch? Definitely. In future, there would be different smart contract standards, blockchains for different categories of assets. That's a very good point. Definitely, there would be more. So even today, when we look at it, blockchains are getting specialized, right? So when we talk about Bitcoin, it's specialized for the Bitcoin cryptocurrency. Although now some people are also trying to create BRC tokens on it. When we look at Ethereum, that's the platform of choice if you want unregulated smart contracts. We talk about Polygon, the main use case is digital NFTs. Similarly, I work on a project called Hybrid Finance Blockchain or HiFi, where the use case is tokenization of real world assets. And I think that's a good thing that blockchains are getting more and more specialized. Another interesting question: can AI models be tokenized and sold? Very interesting question. We'll have to think more about it, but technically, I think an AI model can be considered to be a copyrightable asset. And just like we can tokenize copyright assets like books and software and movies, AI would come under that picture. What are the required documents for real estate tokenization? Okay, that's an interesting but uh, a very, very long answer. So why don't you just DM me on LinkedIn and I'll send you the checklist, or you can check out my tokenization playbook. That may also be able to answer some of your questions. Can you give me a recommendation coin that I should know? I don't give out recommendations for crypto. Uh, okay. Why should we use blockchain for tokenization? Why not do it off the chain? Sure, that's a very good question. So when we talk about things like Shema, the shares that are not on the blockchain, that are happening on conventional technology, so definitely you can do tokenization on that. But blockchain brings in certain advantages. Firstly, it cuts out a lot of the intermediaries. So you don't need so many intermediaries which are there in the stock market. You can replace them with blockchain. Secondly, blockchain is real time. So whereas conventional technologies, you would depend upon the work timings of, say, exchanges. So you can't do it 24/7, 365. Saturday, Sundays, exchanges may be shut. Blockchain runs 24 by 7. You are in control of your asset, so you have your private key. You can sell it to anyone, anywhere, whenever you feel like. So blockchain brings in a lot of advantages, but of course, you can do it without chain. I'm not denying that at all. Anything that does not grow in value with time cannot be tokenized. Sure, I think that's a very good way of putting it, that when we were talking about what cannot be tokenized, something whose value doesn't grow, but now let's take an example of an aeroplane. Its value over time goes down, but it is generating revenue every year. So that may not be the perfect way to say. Even certain things whose value is not going up like an aeroplane can be tokenized because they are generating revenue regularly. Another interesting question, can we tokenize live things? So we tokenize trees. Yeah, of course you can. No doubt about it. You can definitely tokenize trees. Still a lot of development ecosystem like identity management, analytics, efficient UI. Yes, that definitely needs to come in. But you see, that's everywhere, right? When the internet started, or when e-commerce first started decades ago, a lot of the systems were still being built. And over time, as the needs for e-commerce improved and became clear, the ecosystem also grew. So I would say again, this would be the way in which it would happen. Uh, Another interesting question, if we create CBDCs, will not the government have too much control on money? Well, this may surprise many of you, but they anyway have control over the money. See, money is created, or rather currency. I wouldn't say money because money includes all assets. Money is anyway, currency is anyway created by the government. So making it CBDC doesn't really change the level of control that they have. What is a digital twin application in NFT? So what do we mean by a digital twin? If ownership of a blockchain token equates ownership of the underlying physical token, then we say they are digital twins of each other. What are the tax implications around issuing a token? Can they be issued in India? Yes, of course, they can definitely be issued in India. And tax implications. So, one is if a token is backed by a real world asset and transfership of the token results in transferring of that asset, it does not come under the definition of a VDA or a virtual digital asset, and it does not get taxed that way. So government has issued some clarifications under the Income Tax Act, and under that, those special benefits are given only if the blockchain token is backed by a real world asset. So I can see there are tons and tons of more questions, but we're kind of done. So today I had planned a 30-minute session, but I'm really happy with the questions you guys have put in. So I'm going to do the next session next week, and I see a lot of questions here which I will answer next week. And I also want you guys to join this WhatsApp group. I'll put the link here. So whenever I do any session around real world asset tokenization, I keep posting it on this WhatsApp group so you can attend. So I put it there. Just join that group, and I'll answer all your questions on that group, and I'll also be taking regular sessions on this starting next week. So I look forward to seeing you guys there also. Take care. Bye bye.